There's this incredible hidden story behind the food we eat every single day. It's a story that connects the farms that grow our food, the chemicals that are sometimes used, and even the wild birds you might see right in your own backyard. So, let's dive in.
Okay, so let me ask you something. Picture this. You're in the grocery store, standing in front of the produce. What actually makes you pick up one apple instead of another?
Yeah, for most of us, right? It's probably the price. Or maybe where it's from. Or, hey, maybe it just looks perfect. And look, those are all totally fair reasons. But there's a much deeper story behind that simple choice. A story that actually links what's in your shopping cart to the health of the entire natural world.
And that's exactly what we're going to dig into first. These invisible connections between our farms and the birds that are literally all around us.
So let's just get real for a second. Farmers have to protect their crops, right? And a lot of the time, that means using pesticides. It's a super important part of making sure we all have enough food to eat and that it's affordable. I mean, without these tools, harvests could totally fail, and you can bet food prices would go through the roof.
So what we're looking at here is a classic trade-off. On one side, you've got the benefits, stable harvests, affordable food for everyone. But on the other side, well, there's this unseen cost, and it's a big one. Real harm to wildlife and the entire ecosystem.
And this trade-off, it leads us straight into something you could call the pesticide paradox. It's this weird situation where the very thing we use to solve one problem, protecting our food, ends up creating a bunch of new problems for the environment.
Now, how these chemicals actually affect birds? It's pretty complicated. It's not always as simple as direct contact. A bird might get sick just from eating a contaminated bug, or even more indirectly, their main food source, all those insects, could just disappear because the pesticides wipe them all out.
And the effects are, well, they're really serious. We're talking about things like disorientation because of neurological damage, serious reproductive issues, or just a completely weakened immune system. And yeah, in the worst-case scenarios, this exposure can be fatal.
Okay, I know this all sounds pretty bleak, but here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. We actually need to completely rethink how we see these birds. They're not just victims in all this. They can be our allies.
It's so easy to see a bird hopping around in a farm field and just assume it's a pest, right? That it's there to eat the crops. But a lot of the time, that's just not the case at all.
In fact, the reality is often the complete opposite. So many of these birds are actually nature's own little pest control team. Take sparrows, for instance. To feed their babies, they eat thousands of insects, things like caterpillars, that would otherwise be munching on the very crops we're trying to protect.
So think about that. We're harming our own allies. It feels pretty counterproductive, doesn't it? When we spray these, broad-spectrum pesticides that kill all sorts of insects, not just the bad ones, we're also taking out the food source for these super helpful birds. It becomes this vicious, self-defeating cycle.
So, if the path we're on is so counterproductive, what's the alternative? Well, the good news is there are much smarter, more sustainable ways to do things.
And one of the most powerful solutions out there is something called IPM. IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management. And to put it simply, it's a much more thoughtful approach. Instead of just reaching for the chemical spray as the first option, it's about using a whole toolbox of different methods to manage pests, all while trying to minimize the risk to us and the environment.
So how does it actually work? Well, step one is all about using nature's own defenses, bringing in the natural predators like birds and helpful insects. Step two is using smart farming techniques like crop rotation, which can naturally break a pest's life cycle. And then only as a last resort do you bring in the chemical pesticides. And even then, they're used in a much more targeted way.
But here's the thing. This solution isn't just for farmers. We all have a really important role to play here. The choices we make, you and me in the grocery store, they send a ripple effect all the way back to the farm.
I mean, what if we chose to buy an apple that wasn't perfectly shiny? If it meant it was grown with fewer chemicals? We can use our wallets to support farmers who are doing things the sustainable way. And hey, just visiting a local farmer's market and talking to the people who grow your food, that's a powerful way to learn and show your support.
Here's a great little story that makes this so real. There's this farmer who plants rows of flowers all around their fields. Why? Well, those flowers attract ladybugs. And guess what ladybugs love to eat? Pests like aphids. It's such a simple, beautiful example of working with nature instead of fighting against it.
Okay, so let's bring this all together.
When you step back and look at the big picture, you realize this isn't just about birds or farms. It's really about our shared responsibility for the health of our whole planet.
You know, the birds you hear chirping outside your window, they're so much more than just background noise. They're trying to tell us something incredibly important about the world we live in. They're basically an indicator of the environment's health. Think of them like a canary in a coal mine, but for the entire ecosystem. If you see lots of different, thriving birds, that's a great sign that things are healthy. But when their numbers start to drop, that's a major red flag that something is really out of balance.
So, I want to leave you with this one question to think about. The next time you're outside, just stop for a second. Look around, listen for the birds, and ask yourself, what is the health of my environment telling me